Konnichiwa. What was your thoughts on this Suzuka GP race? Did you enjoy this race? Were your expectations higher because of last week's race, where we had the battle to the end of the race for that first position? I thought this was a fairly good race. Yes, we didn't have that front-running contention like we had last week, but we had a pretty good mix overall, and we had some battles throughout the field that caused a lot of concern for a lot of different constructors. And then we had people dropping out because of some issues of contact that was caused early on this race, and they could not quite get aligned throughout this race. Anyway, howdy and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is my post-race reaction for the Suzuka GP. As I said, I enjoyed this race. I'd probably mark this a 7 out of 10, maybe an 8 out of 10, just due to the rest of the field making up for that front running position. Yes, we had that first corner where we had the two McLarens putting pressure on Max going into that corner for that first position, going on either side of it, which was exciting to see. But once Max got out ahead, he stayed out ahead and was easily in first the rest of the race. Even though Lando Norris was saying that, oh yeah, the McLarens are putting pressure and are looking good to put pressure on those Red Bulls, I really don't see that with Max running of this race. But the rest of the field was really cool to see them fighting it out for that second position and lower. We had some contact early on in the race that caused some issues for some drivers. And we had a little bit of contact later on in the race that spun some people around that dropped them back in the field, unfortunately for them. Overall, I said I enjoyed this race considerably, and as normal, I go from the back of the field to the front, telling you my thoughts on each driver as we go through them. So without further ado, we will start off with Valtteri Bottas. Valtteri did not have a very good race. He kind of got sandwiched between Ocon and Albon at the beginning of the race and kind of got hit. And he had to come in for a front wing replacement to start us off on lap 3. And he kind of continued around, and then he got contact with Sargent on lap 6 that caused some more damage to him. And he eventually just decided to call that in on around lap 7 or 8. He just pulled that in and ended his day. So it wasn't a very good day for Bottas, especially when they were thinking that they were going to be higher in the rankings when they were doing those free practice sessions than they ended up even in qualifying. I thought he was going to do a little bit better than he was doing in this race. He did qualify 16th. I think they were trying to hope for a little bit farther up the grid. He did drop back 4 positions because of that contact at the very beginning of the race, and just dropped back because of the front wing replacements, and then getting hit again, and then couldn't really make up that ground, and having that damage of the car to the fact that he couldn't proceed, so he is pulling in. So really wasn't his fault dramatically, but not that great a race for Valtteri. Sergio Perez had a horrible week as well. He had contact at the beginning, getting sandwiched between Sainz and Hamilton, which caused him to have a front wing damage that he then pitted on lap 3. He came out and then had contact with K-Mag later on, and they got him another 5-second penalty. He did get a penalty for coming in onto the pits and passing up Alonso when he was coming into the pits with that safety car going on. So that pushed him back farther. And then the big controversy, after he DNF'd on lap 15, is they fixed that car. He hadn't served that second 5-second penalty. And so the big controversy is that they actually put him back into the field like 16 laps down, just so that he could serve that 5-second penalty and not carry it over to a 3-place grid penalty next week. So the controversy is like, should they be able to even do that, as they pulled in and were thinking about, just killing that car for this weekend as a DNF and then later pulling it back out so they could actually just serve the penalty and not cause any more damage to them in the future. In my view, I think that's kind of a underhandedness in the sense of against the spirit of the rules. Obviously, it met the strict rule set, and so they were able to do it. And in that regard, I think it was wise for Red Bull to do this, as they can go into next week fresh and clear and not have to worry about this or whatever issues that Sergio had this week carry forward into his race plans next week. So it was really good on Red Bull to know the rules set to the extreme that they did so that they could actually get that penalty served this week instead of next. But as the spirit of just the racing rules, I didn't like it at all. But and again, it's not my view that counts. It's actually the rule set. And so as some people said, that rule will probably get looked at and maybe modified before next season so that this can't happen again, depending on how things play out with the rest of the teams. Anyway, Sergio had a horrible weekend, having contact with several people. I didn't rate his race very good. I think he was becoming desperate, kind of doing these last lunges that he didn't have the room for. He didn't get alongside of him during the corners and causing these contacts that kind of knocked some other people out of the race in this session, which was not very Sergio Perez-like. I think he's just feeling the pressure of Max just running away with it and that talk about whether he deserves that second seat in that Red Bull, which is then actually compounding the issue by having him make these mistakes. So, not a good race for Sergio. Lance Stroll qualified in 17th and ended up in 18th, dropping out fairly quickly. He did box on lap 15 to switch over to some mediums, and then again on 21, he came in and they just ended up retiring that car. What I've heard was that they had a rear wing failure that they were announced to Fernando Alonso later on, saying, hey, your teammate had a rear failure, so we had to retire his car. So be wary and don't hit the bumps or curbs in your race to help minimize the risk of a failure on Fernando's car. So that kind of had to slow Fernando Alonso down a little bit. Lance didn't have a great weekend because he didn't kind of qualify and match up where his teammate was, who qualified in 10th, where he was down in 17th. So that's 17 places. That's 7 places down from the field where his teammate was. So not quite on par, coming back from that crash that he had last week. So it's not a really good weekend for Stroll, even though the DNF probably was not his fault with that rear wing failure. He didn't get a chance to really shine. He did get a pretty good jump at the very beginning of the race, which helps, gaining 5 spots, but then having to retire early on did not help him at all. Then we have Alex Albon, who did fairly decent, except for the start. He had that contact with Bottas, so she dropped him back 3 spots. He was pulling back up, and then with that damage, he just couldn't maintain that Williams in this running, so he ended up dropping out. Sorry, I missed Logan Sargent in this mix. So I'll drop back to Logan Sargent, who started from the pit lane because he crashed in the qualifying session. So he started at the pit lane and in 20th position, worked his way up to 17th, and just did not have a good day. I'm not sure if it was the car or if it was him. He did have that contact with Bottas early on lap 6 that he actually hit Bottas trying to get back around Bottas, which is not a good look for Logan. I think that pressure's getting to him as well in this thought. Had a 5-second penalty because of that collision. And he boxed like another 2 times before he actually ended up just calling it on that. So Logan Sargent had a horrible day. Not doing a really good job on him maintaining that Williams seat, which is the last seat remaining that hasn't been confirmed. So the question is will Liam Lawson be able to pick up on that seat, or will Mick Schumacher be able to switch over and get that seat from Logan? I haven't seen a whole lot from Mick to really warrant that, even though he is the more Mercedes driver, which would fit the Williams. But Liam has actually definitely shown what he can do, so if they can make a deal, that would be a good spot for him. If he can't, we maybe see him the following year in 2026. So that moves us up to the actual finishers of the race with Kevin Magnussen, who was qualified in 15th and ended up 15th. He was running up into that 11th and 12th position, possibly getting into that point range. I know it would have been hard to stay in that point range, but that's when he got hit by Perez, spun Kevin around, and even though Kevin was able to get going again, he lost, like I said, like 30 seconds on that spin, which put him back into the back of the field, and was never able to really regain those positions with that contact. So he kind of got knocked out of having a chance for it. So not the greatest job, but not the horrible job that you would think, ending the day in 15th position for Kevin. Nico Hulkenberg qualified 18th, so worse than his teammate, but he made it all the way up to 14th. He had a quiet day. He did gain 5 spots at the beginning of the race and was just trying to maintain. He started off on those soft tires, which helped him on those 5 spots. But then that soft tire was wearing out, and he had to switch to the mediums, and then switch back over to the hards at the very end to finish off the race. And with that Haas not doing very good on those tires, he just could not maintain the pace with the rest of the folks, and ended up a lap down, as we can see on the screen. Then we get to Guan Yu Zhou, who gained 1 spot at the very beginning. We didn't see anything on Guan Yu Zhou for the most of this race. Kind of quiet on there. He did start off in the softs as well, worked his way up from 19th position all the way to 13th. So not a bad day for Juan in that Alfa Romeo, which was not looking the greatest the last few races. So a decent running for him to try to get pushed back into that contention for points, even though he didn't quite make it to that point position. Yuki wanted a really good showing, ended up qualifying 9th and then dropping back down to 12th. He did lose 2 spots at the very beginning of the race, kind of got stuck behind some people and couldn't make the passes that he needed to make, and kind of wore out his tires in that running, as far as I could tell. And so he just he had a little bit of pace, but he didn't get the straightaway speeds to get past him in the DRS zones. So he was kind of stuck in the back of that field. His teammate actually beat him out overall, which is good to see for Liam Lawson, who qualified in 11th and ended up in 11th. I have him actually passing K-Mag for 13th position on lap 30th. Just kind of hanging out, boxed on lap 10 switch from the softs to the mediums, and then on lap 25 from the mediums to the hards, and then ran the rest of the race distance on those hard tires. So he could have stretched out a little bit of a tire life and made it a little bit higher, but overall that's a pretty good run in that AlphaTauri for Liam Lawson. So that gives us the bottom 10. We'll move to the top 10. Pierre Gasly didn't do a good start. He lost 2 positions at the very start of this race, but was able to make his way up to that point position, which is good to see that Alpine do. He passed Liam Lawson for that 11th position on lap 22, and just kept in that spot and worked his way into that last point position of 10th, doing a fairly good run in that Alpine, as they haven't been quite where they wanted in that Alpine, but at least they're coming back and getting some points in that Alpine where they haven't been in the past. Ocon, on the other hand, was had that contact with Bottas, lost 5 positions, and then was able to make up those positions. So he qualified in 14th. He ended up in 9th. He did pass Albarn on lap 21 for 8th, and then kind of dropped back into that 9th position at the near midpoint of the race, and just was not able to keep that 8th position with Fernando Alonso getting new tires. And having that fresh set of tires, couldn't maintain that position over the champion of Alonso. Which brings us to Alonso, who is in that 8th position. He switched off fairly early from softs to the hards on lap 12. He did gain 4 positions on those soft tires to start the race, which was really good to see. He did pass Yuki on lap 30 for that 9th position. Then he kind of wore those tires out and was dropping pretty fast down the grid, where he had to switch from the those softs to the hards. And then early on, that hards kind of wore out, and so he ended up making another stop again for hards. Then he started working his way back through the field as he had a slightly newer set of hard tires than the rest of the field that were ahead of him, like those Mercedes. So not a horrible job, but not a great job in the sense of that Aston Martin really wanting to be more closer to that 5th position mark over that 8th position. And with his teammate DNFing fairly early on in this race, it was up to Fernando to get as many points as he could on that Aston Martin to keep that constructor standing as much as he can. So as a one person doing the constructor standings for the Aston Martin, where the Mercedes and the Ferraris are kind of pulling ahead with those double point finishers. So he had a little bit of a damage mitigation that he had to go through to try to keep that 8th position, but overall he enjoyed the race and did a fairly good job in this race with that slightly odd strategy that they put him on. George Russell ended up going the alternate route, and so he ended up in 7th, where he qualified in 8th. He tried to do the full one-stop in this race, where his teammate Lewis was doing the 3-stop, which then made it a little bit contentious at the very beginning of the race, trying to figure out who was going to switch to that other alternate strategy. And then at the end of the race, when they came back together, who would be able to maintain that 5th position over the falling back into the clutches of the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, who then qualified 6th and ended up in 6th. He did pass Russell on lap 45 for that 4th position, and then kind of fall back because of the newer tires that they were coming up on. He kind of held out and got undercut by Lewis Hamilton. So he wasn't real happy with that strategy, but there's not a whole lot that he could have done differently in this race. I think he did a fairly good race for what that Ferrari was doing in this race, which was not as competitive as we'd have liked to have seen, but a decent running for those Ferraris. As I said, they're not the greatest thing that we've seen. He did make several passes. He passed Alonso on lap 20 for 7th. He passed Ocon on lap 21 for 6th. And he passed Russell on lap 50 for that 6th position. So did quite a bit of passing, quite a bit of work through this area. He did have contact with Perez at the beginning of the race, so it wasn't a clean race on that vehicle that he had anyway. So put all that together, I think he did a pretty good job in that Ferrari to maintain that 6th position. Lewis Hamilton qualified in 7th and worked his way up to 5th. He did a little bit better than George in the sense that he was a little bit faster, even though Russell passed him on turn 1, and he was able to repass him a little bit later. Actually, I guess I should say Russell passed him on the chicane, and then Hamilton was able to repass him on turn 1 to keep that position early on in the race. He was able to pass Alonso on lap 22 for that 8th position, and then he was able to retake that position from Russell on lap 49. He had team orders on that early fifth position to swap because he was a little bit faster, had newer tires. I know George wanted to try to keep himself at the lead and let Lewis play the defensive role to try to keep Carlos behind both of those Mercedes. But the team opted out for Lewis to pass Russell as he was faster, then try to help Russell with that DRS, which didn't really help. And Lewis, I'm not sure if gave it his full oomph in trying to help Russell, but he did give him that DRS. But that Ferrari just had a little bit too much on that straightaway with that DRS and was able to pass Russell for that sixth position. And that kept Lewis in that fifth position where Carlos wasn't able to gain the spacing and time he needed to put any real pressure on Lewis. Of course, Lewis didn't have enough pressure to put on Charles Leclerc in that fourth position, who had a really good start and was able to pass Russell early on, and then came back on that fourth position from Russell on lap 45. Just had a good race overall, I think, for Charles, beating his teammate for the most part all weekend long, and keeping that hope alive for that Ferrari to maintain their spot on that constructors standings, even with the McLarens barreling down on their newfound spots with that new upgrade on that McLaren. Which then comes us to the Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris is coming in spots 2 and 3. Oscar started off in second position and ended up in third, where Lando Norris started in that third position and ended up in that second position. They both had a really good start at the beginning, where Oscar was putting pressure on Max on the right side, where Lando was going around on the outside of the turn, that then Max had to watch out for on that position as well to keep that first position out of that first corner, which was really exciting to see those McLarens actually putting pressure on Max. But once Max got into that first position, as I said, he kind of ran away with it. But we saw the battle between the two, where Lando was able to get around Oscar and take that second position on that start of the race because of how they came into that corner. And then he came back through after the pit stops, and Lando was behind Oscar with the newer tires, with a little bit faster running, and had to get team orders to help him get past Oscar in that running and then you could see that he definitely deserved it, because he had like a 14-second spot on Oscar, even though everything was running kind of behind. But it was really well done on Oscar's point to actually get his first podium, and being a rookie, getting that first podium is phenomenal. I think it really shows what he can do. And he defended really well. He put pressure on people. I think he had a really good race. He does need to learn a little bit from Lando on how to keep those tires a little bit better conditioned throughout the race. But I think he will be able to pick that up fairly quickly, as we've seen so far this season, and really put pressure on Lando Norris for that front running position in that McLaren. So it's going to see how they maintain, as they're both been re-signed for McLaren next year. It'll be good to see how they progress and battle it out with each other, and to see if they can stay friends in this battling out within them. Max, as I said, kind of went out with a bang. Got that good start at the beginning, had a good start after the safety car came out with all the debris that was from lap 1. Had the virtual safety car in 14 that he was out in front of. So we can kind of see some of the gaps as he was flowing through this. He had a 3.04 second lead on lap 10, and then about halfway through the race on lap 25, he had like a 10 second or 11 second lead. And by the end of the race, he had like a 19.3 second lead over Lando. So he was doing a pretty good job of just running his own race, being out front, minding his own business, lapping half the field, doing a really good job. I don't think there's any stopping Max. We had that weird issue last week, but I don't think we're going to see another issue in that Red Bull the rest of the season with the last 6 races left. I think they've learned their lesson, and they will probably win the rest of these 6 races. He's pretty much has the championship in the bag. There's only a slight chance that his teammate can actually pull ahead of him. But running the numbers, it's pretty straightforward that he's going to be the world champion early on. And by him coming in first and the Mercedes coming in 5th and 7th, and the Ferraris a little bit farther, in that 4th and 6th positions, he was easily able to claim the Constructors' Championships for that Red Bull. He did have the fastest lap, just to show what he could do in that last block on those hard tires. So just pulling out that fastest lap and then just settling back in. So he was well under control over this race, even though Oscar got the driver of the day, which, to be fair, and having a rookie, make the podium is driver of the day material. I also think Max deserves a driver of the day, as he was able to come back from that issue that Red Bull had last week and just show the world basically what that Red Bull can really do. So good on Max for pulling out that first position. I think he had an easy job running that first position in that Red Bull, but it does take Max to actually run that Red Bull, as we can see with Sergio Perez having trouble the last several races. It's not just jump into a Red Bull and be able to win. It is being able to handle that Red Bull in the method that he does. So good on Max. And so we will drop to the driver standing. So you can see Max at a nice even 400 points, with Sergio Perez almost half that with 223. The big changes here are we see Lando Norris getting ahead of George Russell with 115 points, just by that win that he bumped up ahead of him. And we see Oscar Piastri jumping up to 9th ahead of Pierre Gasly and Lance Stroll. So those are the winners of the constructor standings. Pretty much everything else kind of lined up in the same order that they were already in, gaining a little points here or losing a little points there. And of course, as I said earlier on, the constructor standings have been clinched with the Red Bull, with their now 623 points over Mercedes 305. So the next big issue is that can Ferrari overtake Mercedes in the last 6 races? Can Aston Martin hang on to that 4th position over McLaren as McLaren steamrolls through the rest of this season? And can Alpine, just keep a reasonable position in that 6th? I assume that they can. Of course, then you have the back of the field. If anything weird happens, can Alfa Romeo take over that 8th position from Haas? Or can Haas, really get lucky and put pressure on Williams? The big thing I think here is the battle for 8th and probably the battle for that 2nd position. The rest of them are kind of almost locked in. Maybe that 4th position between McLaren and Aston Martin. Anyway, so that kind of concludes the Suzuka GP. And we have the Qatar GP next weekend. So it's another race week, and it is actually a sprint weekend. So be ready for that qualifying on Friday, the sprint race on Saturday, and of course the big GP race on Sunday, October 8th. So the Qatar, I have Suzuka there, which is wrong. So the Qatar race, which is actually the Le Sur International Circuit, has a length of 3.367 miles, and will have 57 laps done on this track for a total distance of 191.85 miles. They don't have a current record holder for this layout, but it was introduced in 2021. So until then, I will see you on the grid. If you made it this far, please like this video. And if you would like to see my review of the Qatar GP, please subscribe. Thank you very much. Until then, see you on the grid.